In an age where AI can fake a video, social platforms reward outrage, and even the word misinformation means different things to different people, one question rises above the noise. How do we know what to trust? Today, we're joined by Vanessa Otero, the lawyer-turned-media analyst behind Adfontes Media and its well-known media bias chart, to explore exactly that. Vanessa takes us inside the mechanics of bias, the structures driving extreme content, and the habits that actually make us smarter news consumers. This episode is your practical guide to staying informed without getting manipulated. Welcome to the podcast, What Do You Mean by That? We are your co-hosts, Sarah and me, Sasha. Would you please introduce yourself for our listeners?
Hi, I'm Vanessa Otero. I'm the founder and CEO of Adfontes Media.
The reason I'm excited to talk to you is because we've come a long way, even in our lifetimes alone. Like, we've come from the days of single household TVs with those rabbit antennas, and you had to get up off the couch and like manually switch the dial to the 13 stations we used to have. And now we have an overwhelmingly large media landscape. And I would say it's not wrong to say it's challenging our ability to be accurately informed. And so can you tell us a bit about why Adfontes Media started and why things like your media bias chart are so important?
Yes, there's this proliferation of news sources that you identified. That's a relatively new problem. You talk about those days where we had 13 channels, and those of us who are old enough to remember, it used to be like three main network TV news stations, local and national newspapers, like the tabloids that you would see at the grocery store, and it was a very limited universe of news information. And the tabloids like the fake, Bat Boy tabloid on the newsstands at the grocery store, those were the kind of things that would qualify as, fake news back in the day. But in 2016, I created the first version of this media bias chart because that was like the heyday of people arguing badly with their friends and family on Facebook about politics and unfriending their relatives and supporting their arguments with like very biased online sources or YouTube videos. And it made me reflect on the fact that, wow, there are really tens of thousands of news and information sources out there now. Trace it back more to like 2010 to 2012, when not only did you have the internet, which, had a lot of news sites go on the internet, but or newspapers go on the internet, but you had a social media getting really good on smartphones, and it just lowered the barrier of entry for folks to create news-like content to pretty much zero. And then you had this massive explosion of all these news sources. So I created the media bias chart, the original one in 2016, and I can dive into the whole story of where we are now, but that's how it all started.
Can you describe the chart a little bit? Because I can vividly picture it in my brain.
The media bias chart is an infographic. It's just a two-dimensional infographic that from top to bottom rates news sources for overall reliability and from left to right for political bias. So it's not just about bias, it's about bias and reliability. Funny story, I actually didn't call it the media bias chart when I put it out there. I called it a news quality chart, but the public called it media bias chart and it got really popular, and so that's just what it's called. And I mentioned that I created the first image, and it was just about 60 or so logos of individual news sources that I had gone and looked at the content and plotted along these dimensions. And from top to bottom, intuitively, folks understand that, top is good, middle is okay, bottom is not so good. And that's roughly the taxonomy. But we're more granular and specific these days because I created that first one, but over the years, the reason why I created this company is because so many folks would ask for the data behind the chart, the methodology, and for us to add more news sources. And then they'd also complain that I was biased, which is true because I'm just a person. So of course it's biased. So I figured I would need to make it more methodologically rigorous and sound and incorporate other folks from left, right, and center to mitigate our own biases that we all have. So the taxonomy on this, the vertical axis of the chart, the very top is the work that journalists do, fact reporting, and even the fact dense analysis and like short news reporting, short fact reporting stories like local news are towards the top. In the middle are the categories of analysis and opinion. And there's nothing wrong with analysis and opinion, but we do want to distinguish that from news. So from top to middle, there's a gradient of fact, then below that, there's analysis, and then below that, there's opinion. And that gradient, the main difference is, analysis and opinion have a lot of conclusions and statements of meaning and inferences. What makes something more analysis rather than opinion is the density of facts that are used to support those statements of meaning and inferences. And then as you get lower, there's stuff that's not so good. So there's stuff people present as just opinion, but maybe it's selectively incomplete or egregiously so. Maybe it includes like dehumanization and vilification and insult and stuff that's worse than just opinion. And then below that, there's misleading and inaccurate content. Middle, left, and right, that gradient is a little bit more intuitive, but that's what that chart looks like. And a lot of folks have seen versions of it over the last 9 years online.
I think back to 2016 and I think about the moment where Kellyanne Conway says, alternative facts. And
Hmm.
that was like the moment for me where I was like, oh, we are in a completely different world now because if we don't consider like facts can be kind of manipulated, then even
Hmm.
in a chart, right, that you have like,
Hmm.
I think about people who grew up like our kids or people who are fairly young at that time period, their world has been one of alternative facts the entire time that they've been able to process this. And so I think about like, what would people need to know really about like how to keep themselves informed or like the most informed and least manipulated, right? When you think about all of the ways manipulation can happen, right? Whether it's
Hmm.
AI in deep fakes, what in through videos, right? Or, versus words or social media, as you talked about a little bit, versus traditional media or whatever traditional media looks like these days.
Hmm.
So what advice do you have for like our average everyday listener who's
Yeah.
trying to recognize bias
Hmm.
without specialized tools? And is there like one type of bias that's really hard to detect?
That's a really good question. I think it comes down to two main things for navigating the media landscape. There's a lot of things. If you can take classes on this, whole media literacy presentations. I could go through a whole slide deck of like these are all the things that we look for. This is what you should look for. But a lot of folks just don't have time to wrap their heads around all of that all the time. So if you just remember two things, one is looking at multiple sources, just looking around. Don't try to define or divine from the piece of content you're looking at, is this true? Like, don't just look at it extra hard. Look at other things. We have this, how we determine whether things are true ultimately as humans is triangulate all the information we have available to us. And we do have a lot available to us. So instead of just, looking at something on your feed or on a website and saying like, oh, is this true? Open up another tab. It's right there. There's so much available to you. And the second thing, people talk a lot about critical thinking. And there's a lot to critical thinking. You could take a whole, college semester on this. But I think the fundamental question of critical thinking is looking at a sentence that's being presented to you or statements being presented to you and asking yourself, why might this not be true? Over and over and over. Why might this not be true? Even on the alternative facts example, let me give you an example here. So a lot of folks on the left, and this is a bias that's hard to see, a lot of folks on the left will say, like, will point to that moment with Kellyanne Conway and be like, that means that she is choosing facts that are just not true, that she's lying and defending it. There is a much more benign and generous explanation of that statement on the right. That explanation is she's not talking about facts that are not true. She's talking about other facts that have not been included in this one story. And that happens a lot. So it's not because there's a whole universe of facts that, like all the knowable facts about a particular story, one outlet usually can't cover all of them. And biases will inform which ones get included in one story or another. And so when folks who have political viewpoints, left and right, are they're trying to bolster their argument, even if it's like very subtle, they have the choices of which facts to include and which not to include. So there's like a very different interpretation on the right about how like Kelly Ann Conway is saying alternative facts didn't mean that like, no, we just lie now. There's other evidence to support that, for example, just will say false things and just like repeat them, and that's a different situation. But yeah, there's a lot to it.
I love that. I feel like I need to mention Misasha, that Vanessa also is a lawyer. So I am again, seems to be the non-lawyer in this conversation. And the recall that you two have for facts continues to amaze me and astound me. How do people, and in particular, I mean, news sources, like the people that you rank, the organizations that you rank, react when your tool flags them for bias or for inaccuracy? Have they come at you at all?
Yes, and it sort of depends on where they are on the chart. As you can imagine, I feel like we've heard a lot of feedback from a lot of folks, individuals and educators, and especially the news sources themselves. So the ones that are rated really highly, of course, they like that, and they will notice that they believe our news ratings. They think of themselves as highly reliable. They know what goes into creating the news, and what we how we rate them matches that. So when we rate something low because every news source makes mistakes, retractions, errors, corrections, or they'll just lay a turd every once in a while. That's just like, oh, that wasn't a good story. And so, we rate those and they will often get feedback. Folks will ask if they can correct them and we'll re-rate them and we do. So we re-rate anything that comes to our attention that has been retracted or corrected. And they might not get full credit for it. It sort of depends on they get dinged for the mistake, but if it was a great correction, then they can recover sort of the most points. If it was not that great of a correction, they only recover a little bit. But then you've got news sources that are on the far corners, the bottom left and right. And so for those who haven't seen this chart, those would be the most biased and the least reliable. There's a high correlation between high bias and low reliability. Like reliability and bias are independent variables, but they're correlated at certain points. So the very high bias, low reliability sources in the corners, some of them would get mad and will just attack us on social media, and they don't really care to change or get better. That's not what they're here for. They're here for making an audience mad and monetizing off of that and gaining whatever they gain out of that. But there are sources that are sort of in the middle. They're top middle of our chart, highly reliable, and bias is okay, but just within sort of a certain threshold. That's our top green box, and we actually recommend that to people who come to our website. And the box is green, we recommend it. And folks that are just a little outside of that, a lot of them have come to us and been like, "Hey, we know we're left or we're right, but we thought we were better than that." And a lot of those, we have worked with them doing audits and just showing them what exactly scores low that they could change. And some of them have gotten better because of it. So that's actually pretty gratifying. Some of them come at us like, "Oh, please help." And some of them are mad at first. So come in hot with not a cease and desist, but sort of a cease and desist. And it does help to be a lawyer to just talk them through that and why it's not a good idea.
Okay, well, that gave me hope, I think, on not on the extremes, right? But
Yeah.
on, the sources that are willing to,
Hmm.
or that are open at least to really
Hmm.
thinking about how their news is presented. I want to talk about the kind of the extremes for a second
Hmm.
here because they feel like a lot of when we think about sort of content and content moderation, that's
Hmm.
in a traditional sense or how we grew up with it, right? It's like fact checking and media literacy and a lot of what we've already talked about. But for these extreme sources who are sort of monetizing, the being extreme, right? This is seems more like, and Sarah and I spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about systemic or bigger sort of structural issues. And this kind of
Hmm.
seems like an infrastructure problem, right? Like we
Hmm.
have algorithms
Yes.
designed to create polarization, to continue polarization. And we have a
Hmm.
lot of economic incentives now for dramatic content.
Yeah.
So how do we counteract that?
It's really tough. And this is a media landscape is a multi-stakeholder, very complex problem. And that's because of that, there's never just one solution to it. I've always seen, our mission is to rate all the news to positively transform society, which seems like, whoa, what does rating the news have to do with positively transforming society? Well, it has to do with positively transforming the media ecosystem. And there are a lot of stakeholders in this media ecosystem. Yes, news consumers need to be better, but it's not just on them. Media literacy needs to be taught in schools, by educators. Also, it's not just on them. There's a lot of people that are not in school anymore. And then there's the people that have a lot of money and power in the media ecosystem itself, like the advertisers, the news publishers, and the social media platforms. There are researchers, there's government institutions need that participate in all of this. So what all of them need as a baseline to make good decisions, whether it be content moderation or what have you, or like how to teach media literacy, they need ratings on news sources. It's just like not a thing that really existed before this vast proliferation of them. What are we going to do? Rate 9 news sources in the 1960s? That wouldn't be very fun. So it's also not very interesting in a country that just has like one media source like North Korea. It's not a very diverse media bias chart. It's like one source of information out there. So, but that relates to this structural problem. In the United States, we have a lot of factors that result in a very populated, very fragmented media ecosystem. One, we have freedom of the press, which is great. We have freedom of speech and freedom of the press. So the government has big limitations on not what people can say about news and politics. And that's ultimately a good thing. Again, you look at like North Korea or other places that don't have freedom of the press, very few news sources, and that's its own problem. But then we have a really large population, 330 million people, and we have a very embedded two-party system. Folks want to have a third party here, but the way our constitution is set up, it's just not going to happen. It's always going to go to two parties unless we change the constitution and gerrymandering and how we elect folks. There's like books on that. But so there's this intense polarization to like one side or the other. And why that matters is that if you look other countries like in Europe, we've done media bias charts for just those countries. There's not as much stuff in the corners. It's not there. But we have some really large, popular YouTube channels that are extremely polarizing that have as many followers as there's, right and left, far right, far left YouTube channels that have as many followers as a Stephen Colbert show or many viewers, or as like the CBS Evening News. And we have this ecosystem like the Europe does too, with YouTube and Instagram, Meta, TikTok, where you can monetize by having by having an audience of like 50,000, 100,000, a million. You can make a lot of money doing that. But here in the United States, we have a big enough population where to grab attention of 50,000 or 100,000 kind of crazy people that just want to hear your BS and monetize that. A lot of people can do that. There's a big enough country to do that here. Where like the biggest country in Europe is like 50, 60 million people. In Germany, a lot of them are a lot less. And then these like multi-party parliamentary systems, they're not so clearly polarized. I think that structural thing makes it such a unique US thing that we have like big crazies, big channels of crazies. But it's not unique to here. Brazil has that too for different structural reasons revolving around WhatsApp, but they also have a very big population, 200 million or so that feeds into that.
Fascinating. I never thought about the overlay of the population and the availability with all of that. So, given what you're saying, and I realize it's a slightly fraught question because there's so much that's changing so dramatically right now from the top down, but where do you see media bias going from here, call it 5 to 10 years out? And increasingly we started to see stuff like we're going to have bias detection tools. It's kind of fallen flat. Like, where do you see us going in the future, near term?
It's hard to say because I don't think I'm great at predicting the future. I don't think anybody is. And the more confident somebody is about predicting the future, the more skeptical I am about it, especially with how technology changes. I mean, we've had a lot of like technology hype over the last few years, like crypto and Bitcoin and NFTs and blockchain and all that stuff, and then the metaverse, and then AI, and people are like, oh no, this is like really different this time. And it's hard to like sort through like what technology changes are gonna do or ultimately going to have an impact. One like major trend that happens a lot in lots of industries and just a lot of societal units is fragmentation and consolidation, fragmentation and consolidation. So we just have this hyper fragmentation where we have tens of thousands of information sources. One thing that's still finite, though, we have 330 million people, and each of us have 16 waking hours. Maybe we have up to 5 or 6 or 8 if you consume a lot of content to listen to content. That's still finite. How much attention human eyes and ears can pay to content. But then there's tens of thousands competing for it. So it's really everyone just hones in on the handful of things that they watch and listen to and read every single day. And it's very different for each one of those folks. And then we've had this problem over the last few years of fake news and misinformation, as people call them. I don't really like to use those terms, but as a shortcut, that's been mostly about political information because there's been a lot of reasons, incentives for people to create bad information for political purposes. But now with AI, we get bad information that's not real all the time, and it's not even about politics. You don't even know if that cute puppy video is real. So now it's not just the political information that people are not sure if it's real. It's every piece of information. Is this recipe going to turn out because I asked AI about it? And so there's so much unmooring and people feeling I just don't know what anything that's real. And so you are starting to see this backlash because that's a very unsustainable way for humans to walk around the world. I don't know what's true. I don't know what's true. We have to be able to anchor on stuff. And so a lot of folks are turning back to, simpler apps where they just are off their phones, or they're just prioritizing human connection, prioritizing realness and stuff that they can verify to be human. So I hope, I don't know for sure, but I hope there will be a sort of consolidation towards more real things. And that will inherently, more real things and more true things. But it's not a guarantee that truth wins here. We have to fight for it. It's at a disadvantage, the bullshit asymmetry principle. Sorry for the bad words. I think this is my second one on this podcast, but it takes a lot more work to create true information than false information.
Yeah. And people are busy and don't want to necessarily take the time, as you said, to sift through it and figure it out. And we're wired to react to negative, extreme, fantastic news. So yes, it is a lot more work. But I wanted to ask, you just said you don't like using the terms fake news and misinformation. Can you tell me why and what terms you prefer?
Yes, because they are co-opted and politicized themselves, and people don't share the same definitions of them. So that happens a lot with words. So there's an academic definition of misinformation and disinformation, and it's specifically about intent and how is it created and distributed. But people don't use it like that. Not everybody knows the academic definition. Not everybody uses it like that. Some people just use it to say information I don't like or information from the other side, and people weaponize it. So anytime there's a term that is like that, where there's a potential for misunderstanding across different, especially political groups, I just try to use a more precise term. So the bottom two layers of our chart are contains misleading information and contains inaccurate information. And it's when it comes down to trying to say what in this article or in this episode was misleading, we will have a thing to point to. This sentence was misleading because of this. This statement was inaccurate, and here's the proof of why. So there's other terms like that, like racism and fascism. And people don't quite realize that not everybody shares the same definition of those words. People think, oh yeah, everyone knows what racism is. It's discrimination based on skin color, or hating people because of their skin color. That's one definition, but then there's just a lot of other stuff, that connotations that go with that really vary whether you're on the right or the left. So that's why you'll have people disagree so vehemently on whether something is racist, because they just don't even share the definition of the word. So in situations like that, I'll even try to just get precise. What did you mean? What kind of higher incidences of police violence against Black and brown people, a very specific thing instead of saying racism.
Okay, the lawyer in me really appreciates that.
Oh, well, you see why I do this and why me being a lawyer, what made sense. And I was an English major before that, so.
Well, that's all of these signs point to what you're doing right now. I want to ask you, though, what has changed in your own media consumption since you started this?
So when I first created the media bias chart, I realized that my news consumption habits had slowly been formed by algorithm plus habit. So Facebook, the news feed, used to show a lot of news articles. They don't anymore, which is fine, probably for the best. But a lot of digital media publications, analysis publications like Slate and Vox, th those are like kind of similar to each other. And I would like those analysis. Those were like left-leaning analysis publications would have some more opinion and stuff too. And I noticed that my own news consumption was things similar to that, and that's it. And I thought I knew what other news was like. I thought I know what how Fox News is. I know how Breitbart is, but did I ever go and actually like read those? No, I did not like go to the site and visit or like turn on the TV and watch it. And my view of it had been through the lens of people that I would follow on social media. So, like folks on the right, their viewpoint of media on the left would be like Ben Shapiro saying, "Hey, look at what they said on HuffPost. Can you believe them? They're crazy." And then folks on the left would see a clip of John Oliver saying, like, look what they said over on Fox News. See, they're crazy. So it would just be this like warped sample of what you'd see on the other side. And so actually to create the chart, I had to immediately step out of that and be like, oh, well, what is over here? And when I first created the TV version of the chart, because people ask immediately, they're like, well, what about Fox and MSNBC and CNN? And I was like, well, I should rate all the shows. So I had to literally watch all the shows, like every cable show on Fox News, every cable show on CNN, every cable show on MSNBC. It's a lot. And there was stuff on there that I'd turn on and I'd be like, I can't believe people like this. But then I would realize, that's where our country is like it is. And that really made me like see the value truly of reading news sources from various different sides. And we have this like fundamental, like visceral reaction to not wanting to do that. I think about like walking into somebody's house and they have the cable news that you hate on there, and you're like, "Ugh, I can't turn it off. Like, I can't even." That's like an identity protection mechanism. It makes you feel physically sick because you don't want to, you have this identity that's tied to that, and you don't want somebody to convince you that you're wrong. And people don't listen because they don't want to be convinced that they're wrong. They don't have to change their minds. But you don't have to listen to be convinced that you're wrong. You just need to listen to for understanding. It's sort of like, going back to being a lawyer, it's like doing moot court where you have to argue both of the sides. It's so important because the only way you can make your argument is good, or you do this in debate too, is by like arguing the other side and seeing which parts of your argument are weak and kind of BS. So that is like I have a very low in actual news consumption, very low tolerance for opinion cable shows. Ugh. It's not a good use of one's time. But multiple apps on my phone, like AP, Reuters, BBC, CNN, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and just like circulating through them, and my Nine News Denver local news app, going through and circulating through those to get informed, to know what's going on. That's what I do personally. There's a number of good newsletters like Tangle and 1440 that they have different viewpoints on them, but like newsletters can be a good aggregator for news sources. And I default more to text because I can read a lot more stuff and ingest a lot more stuff that way. Most people do short form video these days, which is not my jam, but that is how a lot of people want to consume information. Yeah.
I like that. Thank you for sharing all that.
I want to circle back to something that I kind of touched on earlier, which is kids and media consumption,
Mhm.
and kids who are growing up in an era where they've never seen that traditional media as we grew up
Mhm.
with it, right? It is now algorithms and social media and short form video, right? And memes, and this is how they're getting their information. How do we talk about this with our kids?
Again, another good question. So there are a lot of movements about digital literacy that even for like very, very young people like growing up in this world, and it's hard. It's hard for parents right now. It's hard for teachers because this is how do you teach something that is new to you yourself? And a lot of the studies are lagging on what's good and bad. I mean, the discussion is not just about how they parse these information sources. It's just like what's the role of this technology and the video screens and the social media consumption, the algorithms in their development overall. I mean, there's quite a bit of debate in social sciences. How bad is it that we've all, this just generation has grown up with smartphones. There's a lot of evidence that shows it's pretty bad in terms of like people connecting and like not having social skills and having, mental health issues, things like that. And then secondary thing is like they're coming up in a world with infinite information sources. And there's, because of not only the low barrier to entry of the news information, but because of AI, the content generation, like false content, inauthentic content, can be proliferated at such a rapid rate compared to the real content. And when I found myself over the last couple of months, really defaulting more to disbelieving things before believing them. And that's really like a antithetical to how our brains are wired. We have two kinds of biases, and I love like reading about cognitive psychology. I don't have a background in this, but there's some like great books on this, like Daniel Kahneman, I'm forgetting like some of the other ones, but the availability bias. So we believe things that are made available to us. Like if you read one side of a story, but you don't read the other side of the story, you're just gonna go around with the first thing that was made available to you. Then you have acceptance bias, which is you're primed to accept that the thing in front of you is true and then have to mentally disbelieve it. But now, because there's so much more false information, we have to do one of two things. You have to either really carefully curate what you let into your brain, like with some sort of pre-filter before, or everything you come across in a feed and a scroll, you have to disbelieve it first, and then like it's false until proven true. And that's both of those are a lot of mental work. Teaching adults to do that, hard. Teaching kids to do that, also very hard. But when you like grow up in a like native to a particular technology, I don't know, humans are very adaptable. Like humans tend to learn and figure out the information environment. But it's hard to say like whether like we adults, those of us who are like elder millennials or Gen X, if we've actually done that successfully. I don't know that we necessarily have. Back in the day when they're like, oh, TV's gonna rot your brain, like and people laughed. I don't know, maybe it did. Things are a little messed up. Maybe we should have just read more.
But I think some of the stuff that you're talking about reminds me of the importance of character. Like, I love what you said about disbelieving first, because I fell into the trap of there was a video that came across my feed that I thought was hilarious of a baby covered in powder and the dog there, and then the baby farted and like the powder poofed away. The dog next to the baby's nose was covered. The dog sneezed, and then the baby laughed and farted again. And then like it was
This
hilarious. And I
sounds
sent
so
it.
much like a video that you would send me, by the way. Like this is quintessentially you. So I love this story for so
I
many
don't
reasons. Go
know
on.
how me, a self-proclaimed not dog lover, is actually a dog mom to two dogs. Okay. Like, I
This
don't know how
combines so
this,
many elements of things you love, though.
it's
So,
just
okay.
weird. But all of this is funny. And I sent it to a group of old friends. And the first response was, but isn't that AI generated? And at that point, I literally went, I am going to have to do what you just said. I'm going to disbelieve everything because the AI generated images, I feel like people are more, the psychology I believe shows that people are more swayed by visual images than they are by the words
Hmm.
on a page. And
Hmm.
so, especially video images now are looking so incredibly realistic that I just dismiss almost everything. Like it's fun entertainment, but never
Hmm.
real facts, is sort of my view of all
Hmm.
of that. So I appreciate you saying to lead with disbelief first and verify later. And I think some of the more savvy kids are almost starting to come up with that
Hmm.
viewpoint as well. And so making sure we're talking to our kids about that is seems important, as are the character traits we're talking about. Like you mentioned,
Hmm.
critical thinking, having time in our lives to slow
Hmm.
down and be like, is this real? And, like just giving ourselves these great, like the ways of living that will allow us space to question what is coming our way seems important. Well, then let's circle back to either that former question I
Hmm.
asked you, or like,
Oh,
what is something you'd want to share with our listeners?
well, how we actually rate these, like who is making these judgments on these news sources that we're rating? So, for those that are not familiar, I just want to make sure we cover. So, we have, since 2018, we've had a team of human analysts that over the years, we've had a total of about 120 analysts. And we currently have about 45 on our staff right now. They're employees of Adfontes Media, and they're trained in our content analysis methodology. So to rate an individual news source like the New York Times or CNN or Wall Street Journal, or podcasts like Joe Rogan podcasts, we will take a representative sample of its content. So for websites, it's their articles. For podcasts, it's their episodes. And what constitutes a minimum representative sample sort of depends on the source. We have a minimum that we'll take a look at in order to first put it on our chart. But we've got some news sources like the Daily Beast or Breitbart, where they have a wide variation in reliability. Like they have some fact reporting content, they have opinion content, they have some problematic content. So it really varies. So we have to get like large samples for those in order to put them on our chart. So each one of these articles, each one of these episodes is rated in a shift with human analysts. And the shift kind of looks like this with three people on it. One is right, one is center, and one is left. And we do like political self-assessments and all sorts of tests for what people's political lean is. And then we're looking at various factors of just the content, like the words that are on the page or the words that are coming out of their mouths on a podcast or a video. And we're looking at the headlines and graphics for reliability. We're looking at the expressions, fact analysis, opinion. We're looking at the veracity of implicit and explicit claims, lateral reading and fact checking if we need to. And then for bias, we're looking at things like the language that characterizes the issues and opponents, the advocacy of political positions, like sometimes that's present in a report, sometimes it's not, and then comparison. So comparison to your own sample of what you've seen about the story or just the media in general. And that includes things like topic selection and omission. So each one of those articles and episodes is looked at by a panel and they score them together. They look at each other's scores. And then if they are within range right off the bat, then they'll just move on to the next one. And if they're not, then they can discuss and get their scores within range. And most of the time they're able to. But if not, they can send it off to a second panel. So if it sounds very labor intensive, it's because it is. It's extremely labor intensive, and we've done this for about 100,000 pieces of content over the last 7 years now. Now, we also do this for like scale. I mean, people are like, how can you possibly cover all the news? Well, obviously we can't with just humans. So you use machine learning models and AI that's based on our human training data, and it's always continuously updated. So we rate about 150,000 articles a day. So that's how we do that. I did think of what I'd want to share that people don't ask me. If we want to get to that, then.
Yeah. So what's the question you wish people asked you more often?
Well, especially in a context like this where like there's a lot of interest about just like the chart and the methodology and just the issues plaguing society. I like to talk about how what we actually do as a business because we have to people like the output of it and they're like, how do you exist? Like where's your funding coming from? Like how do you pay for all this? And we've had to figure out how to make a sustainable business for ourselves because our mission is to rate all the news. Rating all the news is expensive and time consuming. So it started the company as a public benefit corporation, which means it's for profit, but we have a stated public mission. And we've sort of figured out along the way if there was commercial value to our data and if people would pay for it so that we could fund our own operations. So over the years, over the last 5 years, we've raised money from mostly angel investors, like people who really care about our company, and we have over 1,000 people who have invested in our company, and they're all sorts of backgrounds. We have figured out that among those various different stakeholders that I mentioned earlier, consumers, educators, advertisers, news publishers, social media companies, we can provide products and services for most of those. So if you go to our site, you can see you can subscribe as a consumer and get like extra access to our chart. You can even get like a mug and a poster. It's a very small part of our business, but people can support us that way. We have our education offerings, like we have media literacy offerings. So hundreds of schools across the country are subscribers to our media literacy curriculum, and thousands more use our resources on there. Again, a small part of our business, but very important part of our mission. And then in the business space, there are lots of companies that need this information because they deal with the news landscape all the time, particularly advertisers. So advertisers want to know that they're advertising on the good stuff and not like the crazy fringy stuff. And it's actually better for advertisers if they advertise in news versus other types of fluffier content out there, because it actually tends to perform really well as an advertising vehicle. So that's what our primary business is now. So we've been at this for about 7 years. We want to continue growing and rating all the news because we feel like we'll need it.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing all that and for spending this time with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to What Do You Mean by That? A show dedicated to being better humans and getting loud for all of us. Hat tip to Sarah's daughter for the logo, and huge thanks to Misasha's son for our incredible theme music. Find out more and subscribe to our newsletter at whatdoyoumeanbythat.com. Because as always, it's all of us or it's none of us.